Part 9, Chapter 5. Macready was in the kitchen, having made a detour prior to returning to the pub and the waiting videotape. He had the big refrigerator open and was taking out a couple of beers to replenish the bar's stock, when the far-off wailing reached him. For an instant he stood there, frozen by the eerie sound, shocked into listening. Then he turned and sprinted out of the kitchen, forgetting to close the refrigerator door. He used a beer can to smash the glass exterior of the fire alarm out in the hall, reached inside, heedless of the broken glass still adhering to the box, and pulled hard on the lever. Bells began to ring throughout the camp, startlingly loud in the silent, insulated corridors. Macready and Norris followed the station manager and Clark towards the kennel. Macready carried a shotgun from the small armory, while Gary hefted his magnum. None of them were fully dressed. Clark carried a fire axe. "I don't know what the hell's in there," he was telling them as they moved forward. "But it's weird and loud and it's pissed off. Whatever it is. Sure as hell ain't no dog." "What makes you so sure of that?" Gary asked him. Clark's voice was solemn. "I've worked with animals most of my life, Chief. No dog has ever made a sound like that." Far behind them, the hallway outside the sleeping cubicles was rapidly filling up with the rest of the outpost's personnel. Men stumbled half naked into each other, into doors, hopping on one foot as they tried to shove the other hastily into pants legs. Feet were jammed into shoes, heedless of possible damage to heels. The peaceful night had turned into a violent morning of confusion. Childs was fighting with his belt buckle, which refused to tighten. He still wasn't fully awake. Bennings shouted at him from a nearby doorway. "Mac wants what?" The camp's chief mechanic sought clarification. "That's what he said, and he wants it now." Bennings whirled and vanished up the corridor before Childs could think to question him further. Clark and his armed companions approached the kennel door. After the two dogs had come flying out at him, the handler had reflexively thrown himself against the half-opened door and re-locked it. Gary eyed him questioningly. "I couldn't think of anything else to do," the handler told him. "And in any case, I didn't want to try anything by myself." The two dogs who'd been locked out were barking hysterically as they clawed at the steel door in frantic attempts to get back into the fight. One of them was badly bloodied, and not from the collision with Clark. The melee continued unabated inside, the noise giving the shivers to the men standing outside. Gary reached for the handle, then hesitated. "How do you want to handle this? This is your department." "I'm not sure it's anybody's department anymore," Clark replied. "You and Norris hang on to these two." He indicated the impatient dogs. "Macready and I will flank the opening. If nothing comes out, we'll go in." Gary mulled it over briefly, then nodded agreement. He and Norris each grabbed a dog by the collar and wrestled them away from the door. Macready took up a position to the right of the doorway, readied the shotgun, and looked tense. Where the hell was Childs? Clark moved to the other side and put a hand on the latch. He looked over at the pilot. Ready? Mac thought of a sarcastic reply, bit it back, and nodded affirmatively. The handler gave the other two a glance, saw that they were too busy trying to control the raging dogs to comment. Clark took a deep breath and flipped open the latch. The heavy door swung outward. The noise inside the kennel was deafening. When nothing showed itself, he nodded to Macready. The two men entered side by side. The interior light had burned out or been broken. It was coldly, unexpectedly dark. Macready cradled the shotgun and snapped on a flashlight, but before he could shine it around the chamber, something hit him from behind and knocked him sprawling. The moment the two men disappeared inside, the two dogs had broken free of Norris and Gary. Unused to handling anything as powerful as a sled dog, Norris had gone flat on his face. One of the dogs had raced up against Macready's legs and upended him. "Mac, where are you?" Clark was shouting. If anything, the decibel level of the snarling and screeching and howling they'd stepped into had doubled. "Here, damn it!" The pilot lay on the floor, groping for his flashlight. It had rolled away from his grasp when he'd fallen, but rested on the floor nearby, still glowing brightly thanks to the tough housing of aircraft aluminium. Righting himself, Macready raised the end of the shotgun and hunted with the light. Clark quickly came up to stand next to him. Very little light entered from the dimly illuminated corridor outside. Macready moved the light around, trying to get his bearings in the unfamiliar chamber. The far corner of the kennel was a seething mass of flashing teeth and ferocious snarls. The latter alternated with that high-pitched, bone-chilling screech. Something periodically threw dogs out of the pile with considerable force, but each time they were tossed aside, they struggled back to their feet and rushed back in to rejoin the battle. The light moved and illuminated something else. Something that wasn't a dog. Some thing. Or was it a dog? It was impossible to tell because it seemed to have some of the aspects of a dog one moment, and when the light revealed it the next, something entirely different. Its very shape seemed to alter as they watched. Macready blinked. The weak light was playing nasty tricks on his eyes. He tried hard to focus on what was a dog 1 second and wasn't the next. A voice sounded imperatively from behind him. "What's going on, damn it?" Gary roared. "There's something in here with the dogs. Some kind of animal." He lifted the shotgun and aimed it towards the pile in the corner. I'm gonna shoot. No, wait! You'll hit our animals! Clark warned him. MacReady hesitated. Do something else then. Clark waded into the heaving tangle of fur and fangs and began grabbing at necks and bodies, tossing them aside. As soon as he'd cleared several away, he started swinging the fire axe, chopping and hacking at the gurgling, hissing silhouette that the dogs were attacking. From out of the darkness came a thick, bristly, dark leg. It looked like something borrowed from a spider, or maybe a crab. It wrapped itself tightly around the axe and jerked spasmodically, sending Clark smashing into the wall. The handler somehow retained his grip on the weapon. The rest of the station team was arriving in ones and twos. They tried to squeeze into the kennel entrance behind Gary for a look at the chaos inside. MacReady thought he could see the thing clearly now. He was damned if he was going to wait on Clark any longer. The shotgun went off several times, an ear-splitting thunder in the enclosed kennel. A furry missile, one of the still fighting huskies, was flung at him and sent him stumbling to the floor. The flashlight rolled free again. As soon as MacReady went down, Gary moved towards him, holding the magnum with both hands and firing steadily in the direction of the screeching and moaning. A dog yelped, struck by a round. MacReady was crawling past the station manager's ankles, trying to recover the flashlight. Clark! Where are you, Clark? There was no reply from the dog handler. He'd hit the wall hard. In any case, it was difficult to hear anything in the kennel now, between the hissing, the frenzied barking of the dogs, and the regular eruption of Gary's pistol. Childs came loping down a side corridor. He was towing a large tank on a two-wheeled dolly. Dual hoses ran from the top of the tank to a heavy industrial torch. He halted outside the kennel and shouted to the men inside. What's happening in there? Childs, is that you? MacReady's voice. Yeah, it's me, Mac. What the hell's going on? You bring that torch? You get your ass in here with it. Childs didn't hesitate. He opened valves on the top of the tank, then switched on the gun-like device itself and rushed into the kennel, trailing hoses behind him. The other men made a path for him. It was still crowded inside, and he bumped into Gary, throwing him off balance. Sorry, Chief. Can't see clearly yet. Never mind me. The station manager snapped at him, trying to reload in the near blackness. Childs! MacReady howled. I'm coming, damn it! Where are you? Here! MacReady signaled with his flashlight, then directed the beam towards the reduced cluster of battling sled dogs. It's over there in the corner! Torch it! What about the dogs? The mechanic hesitated. Screw the dogs! Torch it! Childs touched a switch. Blue flame spurted from the tip of the device. He aimed it grimly towards the tangled mass and opened a valve wide. Flame shot across the floor and struck the center of the mass. The dogs broke away immediately, a more elemental terror temporarily overwhelming their fear and anger at whatever they'd attacked. They scattered and broke instinctively for the open kennel door. Part of the wooden kennel floor began to burn crisply. Something mewed and screeched and clawed at the back wall, too big to fit through the dog door. "We're on fire!" Childs shouted worriedly. "Don't let up!" MacCready ordered him. He was firing the shotgun repeatedly into the flames. Gary joined the firing and emptied his magnum into the back of the kennel, then spoke calmly as he reloaded a third time. "Extinguishers!" he told the men gathered behind him. MacCready had run out of shells. He stood next to Childs, keeping the twin hoses from getting underfoot. His expression bordered on the demonic. "That's it! That's it! Don't let up, Childs! Burn the sucker! Burn it!" The mechanic held the stream of flame steady as he moved slowly towards the back wall. The hissing continued to fill the kennel, more distinct now since the surviving dogs had fled. Outside in the corridor, the rest of the crew was chasing smoldering dogs, spraying them with chemical fire retardant. The smell of burning fur filled the air. Dogs and men choked on smoke and chemicals. Norris led a couple of the crew into the kennel, where they began spraying the floor to keep the flames from spreading. After a brief eternity, the screeching and howling began to fade. There was a last lingering hiss. Then it was silent, except for the steady roar of the torch. MacCready was standing next to the mechanic, hammering on his shoulder with a fist, his eyes wide. "That's it, man! Burn it back to hell! Burn it!" Childs turned off the torch. His voice was subdued. "That's it, man. It's done. It's over." MacCready stared up at him, breathing hard, his fist still poised to strike. Childs grabbed the pilot's arm and squeezed. "It's over, Mac." He put the torch down and walked around the pilot. A body was sitting there, leaning up against the wall of the kennel. "Hey, Clark!" Childs stared into the handler's face. Clark's eyes were open, staring, but the man did nothing to acknowledge Childs' presence. The mechanic turned and shouted anxiously towards the corridor. "Hey! Somebody go get Doc Copper! Fast!" Gary was standing alongside him. He bent over, shining a flashlight into the handler's face. "Shock, looks like." Childs rose, then turned to gaze back to the corner where he'd played the torch. "He's got company." That morning, the recreation room slowly filled with exhausted men. Their faces showed the effects of worry and little sleep. There wasn't much conversation, none of it the usual light bantering, and none of it very loud. They conversed in urgent whispers and pointed towards the middle of the room. Blair stared silently at the badly burned corpses on the central table. There were 2 unfortunate dogs there, and something else. The bodies were connected together like Siamese twins, bound in an inextricable embrace that had nothing to do with love. One animal wore the remnant of Clark's bandage and was otherwise easily identifiable as their Norwegian visitor. It was much larger than its companion, bigger than any husky had a right to be, and there were aspects of it that were anything but dog-like. From hips to chest, the main torso was cracked like old plaster and peeling back at the edges. It looked as though something had blown up inside the animal's gut and was trying to force itself outward. Odd appendages, a peculiar kind of organic cording, were wrapped around both bodies and connected to the flesh of each. They were uncomfortably like those protruding from the body of the deformed Norwegian that Copper, Blair, and Fuchs had been dissecting. Clark sat in a chair against the far wall. His eyes were still glassy, but Copper had administered a relaxant, and the dog handler was beginning to emerge from shock. Knowles stood next to him, talking slowly and patiently, trying to comfort his friend. Childs stood nearby and sucked on a joint, trying to relax, and failing. There was no pleasure in the smoke, not this morning. His eyes were fixed on the floor. When he'd torched the thing that lay on the table back there in the kennel, it had let out a terrible scream, and he couldn't get that inhuman wail out of his head. The burned and battered corpses of 2 other dogs lay on the floor in the middle of the room, close to the table with its gruesome burden. At least they looked like dogs. Blair turned his attention from them back to the travesty of life on the table. His face showed growing concern. He turned and walked over to a wall intercom and pushed the button connecting the rec room to the infirmary. "Fuchs!" The reply was slow incoming. "Yeah? That you, Blair?" "Yes. How's it coming?" The assistant biologist turned and looked over towards the surgery table. 3 more dogs lay on it. All were sedated and badly cut up, but they were still alive. "Slowly. I'm no vet." "Neither's Clark." Blair looked across the room to where the handler was still sitting dazedly in his chair. "He's still not in any shape to help." "I know." The younger man chewed on his lower lip. "I'm doing the best I can for them." "Okay. See you." "Yeah. Hey, you figure out anything yet?" "Not yet. Bye." "Bye yourself." Fuchs moved away from the intercom and started unwrapping new bandages. One of the dogs on the table whined at him. "Easy, boy. We'll get you fixed up as fast as we can. I'll do your leg in a minute." He started towards the table. Knowles was patting Clark on the shoulder and smiling, trying to raise the other man's spirits. "Hey, it's okay now, man. It's dead. It's over." He gestured towards the card table. "You see? There's nothing to worry about anymore." Clark's head turned slowly, and he bestowed a dreamy grin on the cook. "I know. Childs killed it. I saw. Last night, wasn't it?" Knowles let out a relieved breath. "That's right, man. You got it." If Clark's time sense had returned, that was a sure sign that he was going to be okay. At least, that's what Copper had said. He fervently hoped so. He liked the handler. He wasn't snobbish like some of the scientists. Knowles looked over at the senior biologist. "What happened to those dogs, Blair?" He indicated the card table and its distorted shapes. The scientist looked back at him, then at the table again. "You tell me, Knowles. You tell me."